Hey, hello! This is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials.
And today we have Juliette Denny. Juliette, welcome to Professor Game. Are you prepared to engage?
I totally am. I'm looking forward to it.
So Juliette today, she is the Ideologist in Chief. This is her first time, but it's also known as the Managing Director at Growth Engineering. And she has an unwavering mission to wage war on dull online learning. She's a pioneer and expert in applying gamification and social functionality to online learning. And she has an unrivaled passion for learner engagement, which leaves the audiences inspired and electrified. She's a complete package, influencer, expert. She has also direct access to primary research through her own products and solutions, meaning that her talks are packed full of stats and case studies providing the truth in what she's saying. And she's also been named number 30 in the eLearning movers and shakers list, which just so happens to be the highest any learning technologies vendor has ever placed. Juliette, welcome. And if there's anything that we have missed on that intro, or if you want to give us a small glimpse to your personal life, just go ahead.
No, that sounds perfect. That's certainly a great introduction. So thank you very much for that. In addition, I just want to add that I also am a mum to two amazing kids that inspire me every day, and the most amazing fluffy dog as well. So I have the cutest dog, I think, called Lilly. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
That's great. That's fundamental. So you're a mum and also a mum to some dogs and puppies.
Exactly.
But Juliette, the first thing that we want to know from you, to get to know you a little bit more, is what does a regular day with Juliette look like?
So a regular day with me, well, I think I should start by saying there is no such thing as a regular day. So obviously there is the kids. Yeah. So it all starts with the kids and breakfast, and then it moves on to the dogs. And then it moves on to work, and work can literally be anywhere. One of the great things about our company, Growth Engineering, is that we're an international business. So I could start my day with a conference call to Australia or, wherever it might be. And then I'm lucky enough to, our offices are actually where I live as well. So in Windsor, Berkshire. So I have a nice walk to the office, maybe spot by the gym, which is always a good place to get the thinking cap on. And then I arrive at work. And that's really when the real fun of the day starts, because I have an absolutely wonderful team and I feel so privileged working with them every day. They are super inspiring. And I come in the office and I never know what's going to hit me. So I have a fantastic management team, and we talk about lots and lots of different things. And then we have clients that are always curious to learn more about what we're doing. We have clients that have problems with our products and have issues and want to know how they can get more out of it. So there's always conversations with regards to that. And then we're also lucky enough to have businesses that are interested in talking to us to try and solve problems that they might have with regards to engaging their learners, getting more, productivity out of their workforce, and generally just getting that inspiration and, that alignment between, their people and their business in order to get better results. So obviously I love having those conversations, and I'm lucky to have a fair amount to them. So the day is always really varied. But what I would say is that I use a lot of words. So there's always a lot of chatting and a lot of talking, whether I'm doing the talking or I'm listening. It's usually in around talking and listening rather than sitting down writing stuff.
So
sometimes
makes a lot of sense, given your background and your way of working, that you be on a podcast.
Yes, it most certainly does. Yes. Don't ask me to write what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm much better at saying it.
That's great, Juliette. But now we want to get into a story, and the story we want to get into is what we would like to call the worst situation in which you've been in which involved gamification, which you would call perhaps your favorite failure, or something that you've gone, somewhere which is a very dark place and learned a lot from it. So you can share both the story and your key learnings from that.
Okay, I mean, I think, as I always say to my team, 50% of the decisions I make are always going to be wrong by definition. Yeah. So, I mean, failure is something that we at Growth Engineering with our clients, we we don't have a negative perception of failure. The only thing we do have a negative perception is not really throwing your passion into something. That's when we start getting a little bit worried. So I think sometimes you could definitely say that when we're engaging in client projects, and this is definitely something that I've learned over the years, is we can think what we're thinking in our little kind of growth engineering bubble, that we've got the best idea ever. But actually, corporate culture, which is the culture that our customers are living and working in, is very different than the dynamic culture that we have in a small, very creative business. And so one of the lessons that I've learned many times, not just once, many times, is that you can't have a big idea and not take people along with you. Change is only as good as the people that, are passionate about that change as well. So having the big idea is not good enough to necessarily, it can be the best idea. And I do believe that, the best ideas always find a good home. However, the idea can never be yours and yours alone, and it can never be big bang. So one of the things that I'm constantly reminded of, is the fact that if you've got a big idea, you need to bring people with you. And it's not your idea, it's their idea, it's everybody's idea. And the more people that can own the idea, the more likely it is to actually become, the way we do things, the way we do things around here. And I think especially as a smaller business selling into big businesses, you need to step very, very carefully and make sure that when you are delivering that idea that could be very different than anything they've ever done before, that it is shaped, by the client, heavily influenced by the client, so that it moves into the organization in a tone, in a language that, is readily accepted. And that takes, good communication skills. And it also takes, a lot less of kind of them and us.
Juliette, I'm going to jump in because I completely agree with everything you've said, but I'm going to ask you of a time. Perhaps don't name any companies because I know that's a complicated thing for anybody. But a time when you were applying one of these solutions that you have, and perhaps something happened, and tell us what happened and what you learned, and what's something that right after that you said, well, from now on this is something that we'll probably have to change because we realized that this is something that we have to take into account that we didn't used to before.
I think that there are lots of times that things definitely haven't gone to plan. And I think, the reason they don't go to plan is because, we're a technology company and things always take longer and they cost more than initially you would have thought. So I think there's always an issue in and around that. But then again, that's where kind of communication, comes to the fore. I mean, specific examples where we've completely and utterly dropped the ball. I'm struggling to think that there was such an epic fail that it was just not that we don't have epic fails. It's just that I guess that we're talking as a team and we're talking with the client on a regular basis. So
I'm sure you've been able to turn it around. You're very good at that. So
I'm struggling. I feel like I really should have an epic fail story for you.
You feel shamed for not having an epic fail.
It's not that we don't have the epic fail, as you say. It's totally not that we don't. We do definitely have things that that don't meet expectations. I would say technology is probably the biggest part of it. So, a good example would be we have recently launched a game for a client which is only available if you log in via Facebook. Okay, so their audience was to basically try and now I've got a good example. So their audience was to try and attract drivers of a certain age group, younger. And females. And so we said to them, right, well, the way to do this is we want to have leaderboards and they need to be connected to Facebook so that you can see, you can basically invite your friends, it'll go viral. And then what happened is that the people that are passionate about this particular company's products and services are older males. because they're passionate about driving. So what happened was, this app was downloaded, and that particular audience are not Facebook. So we had no way of making the leaderboards drive, because they didn't want to log in using Facebook. So that would be a good example. So what did we do? Well, we just changed it, but unfortunately, because we didn't have an understanding of their sphere of influence, we couldn't use leaderboards. So that would be a good example of failure. So how did we rectify it? Well, there are elements of the gamification within the game that we now can't use. So we're having to rethink how we're going to get that sense of community. I guess that would be a good failure story.
That's fantastic. I there's one thing I would like to highlight from that story, and it's something that we've seen before, and it's the fact that perhaps not you, but even your client had really considered deeply who they were trying to serve. So until you know your players, your users, the people you're trying to serve, it's a lot harder to serve them. So you can't know what solution is best for your users if you don't know your users. So I guess.
I think also the other thing is with that particular use case, the goal was to try and attract a different audience. But what we failed to consider was how passionate that brand was to a sector of the market that we weren't necessarily trying to attract. And you don't know the byproduct of necessarily what's going to happen. So, for example, you could think, right, a hairdressing game is going to be perfect for kids. But actually, once it gets out there, you find middle-aged blokes just really like, coloring people's hair. You don't know how it's going to work when you get onto the App Store. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That's true. So consider that these things might happen and plan as much as you can, but also consider that unexpected stuff will happen, and you'll have to pivot, and that's natural and that's normal. It always happens in gamification, and be open to it. Be open to improve your product and to change whatever you're designing for your learning audience.
Okay.
Juliette, let's now shift and actually instead of going for the epic failure, let's go for an epic win and talk about what's a great challenge that you faced and actually solved using gamification for your clients, for example.
I mean, I think the best example for us is when we, because obviously we're a learning management technologies provider as well as gamification, but there are a lot of companies that come to us because we're classed as a next generation learning management platform. So they come to us not really understanding the process of gamification, and then what happens is we talk them through, our kind of the USPs of the platform, our gamification, their social, and their also personalization. And that's when basically their eyes come alight and they're like, oh my God, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And so we had one particular client, and that's exactly what happened. So they were looking around for a platform. We explained, what gamification was all about and what you could do with, the process of gamification. And then suddenly, they're like, wow, we could do this, we could do that. And so this was for an external reseller platform. And traditionally, the resellers have been very, very slow to take the time out to basically come and do these big chunky pieces of e-learning. And what we did is we turned it into a game. And not only did we turn it into a game, we turned it into a series of games. So there was an end to it. So we said, right, this quarter we were going to do a game on performance sports. This quarter we were going to do, a game on, sailing. This one we were going to do. And that worked really well because then they were doing more what we call kind of campaign type learning. So there was a beginning and there was an end to it. And then obviously we use the reward center to allow them to redeem their points. And so the whole idea of training became much more like you're entering into a game-based world. So it was actually called this company Game Plan rather than an LMS. So that was a big kind of pivot point for them, and for us, which was fantastic.
That sounds great. And one thing that called my attention from your story is the fact that you were mentioning that it had a beginning and an end. Have you found that to be something like that helps the learning in your products, like having a specific like beginning and end, and then have like a launch of the learning and then have another launch for the next section?
Well, I mean, I think one of my favorite things that I say when I'm speaking is I talk a lot about the self-determination theory. So this idea of when you are competent. So within the self-determination theory, you have this idea of being autonomy, competence, and kind of relatedness in terms of learning. And so the idea of progression is really, really important in learning. You as a learner, in order to be self-motivated, need to have a really clear idea of where you are in the process. And so in terms of the learner journey, it is a journey. And so it is kind of vital that there are stages within the learning journey, because if you don't show that you've got competence, it's very difficult for them to become self-aware of what they don't know, but also be self-motivated in terms of learning more. So in terms of learning, it's very important to have, an idea of where you are on that competency scale. But in terms of games, it's very important, I think, because you want to change the narrative, because you don't want to be reading the same story forever. I love The Sopranos, right? But I couldn't watch The Sopranos for 900, series. You need, so I think, where campaign learning is important is it's more in and around the narrative, and also the fact that, necessarily the core dynamics of the game will not be interesting forever. So, and do you have the ability to change the core dynamics in the middle of the game? So I think it's thinking of those, all of those things, which is, why we often refer to the idea of, right, we're going to have campaign learning, so it's going to be exciting. Oh, have you heard this new thing's coming on the platform? This new thing's coming on the platform. Oh, there's a new level open. Oh, there's new, whatever it might be.
Makes sense to call the attention of people that are otherwise really busy and not on top of things on the learning, for sure.
Totally. And we don't really want people to think about it as learning. We want people to think it more like edutainment. So, I'm learning, but actually I don't really know that I'm learning, because I'm battling, I'm going on learning quests, I've got a learning challenge to do, I'm, taking part, in whatever it might be. We don't want people to think of it necessarily as learning. We want them to think of it as edutainment. So we want people to go, oh my God, I can't wait to see what else is on the platform.
I agree with you that there's the perception of the learning not necessarily being fun and entertaining, but I think it's something that we, in a way, that we have to bring back, because learning has always been fun. I mean, as kids, how do you learn to do absolutely anything when we're just born? Through games, playing and having fun. That's the way you learn. So the work that you're doing, that work that many people are doing on gamification, I think that it's a fantastic way to bring back the fun into learning, even if we want to mask it a bit with edutainment. So,
yeah, and I think also the other thing is just building on that. I think this whole idea that humans need to learn, right? I mean, we know from the whole idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that the reality is that if you're not learning, you're not happy. Yeah, you're only happy if you are learning. So learning isn't the problem. The way it's presented is the problem.
Exactly.
So people naturally, they get up every day, they want to learn something new. We are curious. And you know what? The day we decide we don't want to learn, the day we decide we're not curious, then we're getting old.
Yeah.
So, the reality is that organizations have a massive and very exciting role when it comes to inspiring people to stay young, to be curious. I think it's just a pity that we've got the e-learning industry into the state we have now. So, yeah.
You have to stop being a barrier. So yeah. Juliette, let's move into the next question here, and we would like to know: is there any process? Is there any series of steps that you follow when you're going to create a solution on e-learning and gamification? What do you have a process?
I mean, we do have a process in terms of we obviously use the tools that we've developed ourselves.
Of course.
So I think that's the first thing. So the first thing we always start from is, what is the client actually telling us? Not saying to us, but telling us, okay? Because sometimes, the issue is that people, they say things, but actually it's not actually what they mean. So they might say to you things like, I want to create the most amazing game, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to change the organization, I'm going to do this. And then when you actually start talking to them, you suddenly realize that actually that's not possible. So inquiry is obviously the start point. So once we've done the proper inquiry and we really know, what the stakeholders, what good looks like, what they want to think and feel, what they want the learners / players to think and feel when they're going through the game, then we can begin to really have a very deep understanding of what the end product might look like. Then after that, we're obviously looking at the tools that we've got at our disposal to create that, which is obviously, something that we've got to look at. And then I think the process that we generally go through is really looking at kind of a couple of different things. So once we've kind of said, okay, is it going to be a series of different stories or narrative? Is it going to be something that we're going to do, with the platform alone? Is it going to be short term, long term? Is it going to be gamified or is it going to be a game? Then we're really looking at kind of two different things. We're looking at what are the core game dynamics. So what's the actual gameplay of it? And is that going to be campaign based or is that going to be long term based? And is there an option to change those core dynamics halfway through the campaign, or is it going to be a series of things? And then we're looking at the plot. So narrative is very, very important. And usually that narrative needs to dovetail precisely and exactly to the organization's core values. So the missions and values that make sense to that organization. And if we can align those things, so our technologies and our tools, the core dynamics that we think are going to work to make it most electrifying and most entertaining for the users, the narrative, so, what is the basic plot, then that's basically the kind of process that we kind of follow. Now, we don't necessarily discuss all of that necessarily with the client, but that would certainly be the way that we would look at it internally when we were rustling up some ideas. Ultimately, I think our biggest driver is what we call epic meaning. So is the epic meaning congruent with the game, and is that congruent with the missions and values of the organization? Because if that is, if that all kind of aligns, then you can get something very powerful. And so you can get learners really kind of wanting to engage with their heart rather than engage with their mind, which is really what we want.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for revealing some of your internal processes and how you guys approach a gamification project. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Juliette. We're going to pass now into the second section, and in this section, instead of going for the stories, we're going more for the tools, the tips, the tactics that you can help us with. And the first one we would like to know is if there's anything that you think that any gamification project could benefit from, any best practice that you've seen throughout the years.
I think one of the things that I don't know, it's difficult to say one particular thing because I do think a lot of things need to align. So if you haven't got the right core dynamic with the right narrative, for example, I don't think it necessarily works. What I would say in my world is really going back to what I said before, that the things that work the best are the things that are tied to the core values of the organization. So we're lucky enough to work with some organizations that have some very, very strong values and are very meaningful in the minds of the people that work there. And so if you can tie your project into some of those values, then you get, heart as well as head. So I think that would be something that I would always say, that, emotion and emotional resonance is really critical. If you can get emotional resonance, then people just can't stop thinking about it, because emotion works on it just keeps coming back. You've got them. You've got them. So find emotional resonance. If you find emotional resonance and tied into, the epic meaning and mission and values of your organization, then you're onto a winner.
Absolutely fantastic. And what's your favorite game, Juliette?
When we were little, we used to play a game called Agri Hazard, and I think it's still my favorite game. It's exactly like Monopoly, but it's just farms, and I just love the idea that you could collect cows and tractors and stuff like that. So I can't, and I still love it. I play it with my kids. I like Monopoly, but I still love the idea, that I'm a farmer somehow, and I just, even though it's a board game, I can almost smell the fields. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. That has always been my favorite game. That's it.
Is there anybody that you would like to listen to interviewed in Professor Game?
Absolutely, Carl Cap, without a shadow of a doubt. There, I think the man a legend. I've been very influenced by some of the stuff that he's done. Ralph Costa is also somebody that I would love to hear on your show. I think both of them are incredible.
Yeah.
There are so many people like in this field though, and it's really wonderful to see how gamification and game-based learning is really influencing education. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing your podcast in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Is there, if you had to recommend one book to our listeners, which would it be and why?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I really like Ralph Costa's, Theory of Game book. I think that's fantastic. There's just so much in there that, you can keep going back to and keep learning from. So I would say, that's definitely one that we refer to a lot when we're trying to explain, how you set up a piece of technology. So, the Mastery Mountain, which is in that the Ralph Costa book, I think is one of the most important things when you're trying to get people to do things that necessarily they don't want to do, like the introduction of a large piece of technology. So yeah, I think that anything by Carl Kapp, I think is legendary. Yeah, there's a lot out there.
Yeah, there's amazing stuff, and that's something that gets me excited every day to do this podcast and to have this mission, is that there's so many amazing things, so many amazing people out there doing their things and creating change in the world through gamification and education and learning, that it's an exciting world to live in for sure. Juliette, which is your superpower in gamification?
I mean, I think I'm just a naturally enthusiastic person, and I'm not particularly wedded to any idea. So I think my superpower when it comes to gamification is that I get excited by lots of ideas, and then the good thing is there are lots of people that know how to shout down a good idea, whereas I can advocate for a lot of different ideas. And so I would say that my superpower is I just generally get enthusiastic, and I get excited about stuff. My ideas, other people's ideas. So I would say that's probably my superpower. I think you need a lot of energy. You need a lot of energy to change the world.
Absolutely, and it's very necessary.
It is very necessary, and I think you need to be relentless, and I think you need to be tenacious and passionate, and you just need to keep going. So I think enthusiasm.
Definitely.
I think I would like to think is my superpower.
The next thing that we are going to do now is we're going to pick a random question from the audience. These questions have been curated previously, so it's not going to be something like "What's your name?" It makes sense for a guest of Professor Game, but I don't know which one is going to come up, and of course our guest doesn't know either. So we're going to click here, and there you go. Okay, this is it. This person says, as a history teacher, I am convinced that learning dates and historical events by heart, learning them by heart, is not the best way to go. However, this is how I was taught that these classes should be delivered. So I don't see much further. I have been listening to the experts on Professor Game. Oh, thank you for that. And certainly have had some sparks of inspiration. But I would love to hear some advice around how to teach and even evaluate my students around their history knowledge. How would you approach this, Juliette?
The funny thing was, I was actually only thinking and talking about this with a colleague the other day about how wrong we are in history. So, I was talking to my son. He's just about to pick his GCSEs. And I was like, I love history. Why don't you go over history? And he's like, what's the point? It's just a number, dates. It's just like moments in time. Yeah. And I'm like, no, it's not. That is not why we have history. We have history to understand how it can influence our behavior on the future. That's what's so amazing about history. So, I think, what I would say is if I was good enough to be a teacher, because I do think that, teachers can literally make, the next generation in terms of the impact that they can have, on people's lives. I would say that, history is a living, breathing subject, and it's not about who died or who lived when. It's about the impact of their decision making on that moment, and what would you think and how would you feel if you were that moment in history? Like, what would you have done? How would you have explained the impact of the decision you made, a month ago to your family around the Christmas table? These are people that have lived, these are events that have happened. And I think what we should be looking at when it comes to history is the impact on people's lives and how, it can influence the future. And I think that's where history comes alive. But I totally agree, with your, the questioner. If history becomes only dates and times, there's no point having it. History is about how it can inform what it means to be human, what it means to have a successful life, what it means to, have regret, what it means to learn about better decision making. And we just don't get that from a lot of history. I think there's far too much focus on, learning things that don't make the world a better place. Like, there's no point learning, I don't think. No point learning if there's not an impact of that learning.
Yeah, memorizing is something that turns off almost everybody from a history class. I can tell you, I hated history when I was at school. I absolutely hated it. And in my adulthood now, I'm trying to catch up from all the things I didn't pay attention to. And of course, they probably wouldn't even have taught them in school anyway. But I'm now trying to catch up with all the things that I should have learned in school. And I have to make a specific effort because I'm actually loving it.
And I think that's so interesting. There's a saying, isn't there, that education is wasted on the young. And it really, really is. That love of learning, I love reading now history books. This was not something necessarily I did. I didn't enjoy, as you said, being in the classroom, but you love learning. I think it's interesting, how
stop taking away the excitement from learning and giving it back to learning, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There's one last chance that we want to give you, Juliette. If there's any advice that you would like to give to our listeners, the engagers, especially to those who have never used gamification, who have never used these tools that gamification games can provide for their classrooms, for their trainings, is there any advice that you would tell to our engagers before we take off?
I think in a corporate sense, the one piece of advice I would give is some people get very scared of the word gamification and game-based learning and serious games. And people say, oh, no, that's not going to suit our company culture, or it's not going to suit our school, or it's not, we need to do this, da, 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 da. But actually, if you unpick what gamification, means, I think that's where things start to get a little bit more interesting. I think the process of gamification is much, much more than just badges and leaderboards. There's a whole kind of wealth of information, out there on gamification. And what I would encourage people to do is kind of dig into it and then use the terminology that allows them to influence in the best way. So I guess that would be
your 2 cents.
My piece of advice.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for that. Juliette, can you tell us how can we connect with you, and then we'll say game over?
Yeah, fantastic. So I've got Twitter, which is at Juliette Denny. I'm obviously on LinkedIn, and our website, our corporate website is growthengineering.co.uk. And I'm always very eager to connect with other gamification ideologists, people that are passionate about the area. So please do reach out. And thank you so much for having me on. The questions are fantastic. They've really got me thinking about things. So thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. I will certainly be listening in to the rest of your podcasts.
Thank you very much. You're very kind, Juliette. And regretfully, we could spend all day talking about gamification, but it's time to say game over.
Thank you.
Hey, engagers. It's fantastic to have you around. Thank you very much for listening to Professor Game Podcast and the awesome Juliette Denny. I have to tell you that this podcast only makes sense with you. So I ask you to connect through our email list. Go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started. That way we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game has for you. Hey, before you go into your next mission, do you want to know what's the difference between the hero's journey and the collective journey? Well, next week we will have the expert on the topic of storytelling and narrative, Jeff Gomez. He's worked on fantastic storytelling and with incredible companies, incredible brands. He's worked with movies. He's done a lot of amazing things, and we will have a different episode this time because it'll be around the narrative, the journey, and the collective journey. I can assure you it will be a fantastic interview. It'll be a bit longer, but you will get a lot of value and a lot of experience from Jeff. So, if that's something that excites you, please listen into the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!